So let's look at what we usually would use in the studio, which is a parametric EQ. Okay, parametric EQ gives you, you see here, different bands. There's the low frequency, lower mid frequency, upper mid frequency, and high frequency. These 4 bands here. And because this is fully parametric, meaning that you can sweep what frequencies you decide to use, you can either add or subtract from those frequencies. This is what one of my favorite EQs looks like because it's so easy to set up and use. Frequency, amplitude, if this is even amplitude at all frequencies, and then we've broken this into our imaginary bands. So this is the low frequency, low mid, and then high frequency. You can either add or you can subtract. And this is your frequency of choice, which can be anywhere within the band. And this applies to all the band. So let's say your snare drum has this ring to it every time the snare hits. Bing! We hate that. How do we find that? We find the frequency, and then we go, oh, I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to reduce that. So now we're readjusting the spectrum. So certain frequencies are being readjusted as opposed to other frequencies. That's what I was saying. You always have to think of this in perspective. There's no absolute. It's all relative. So when you pull something out, it appears as if the other ones are getting louder. So this is called a D2 plugin for your computer system, and you see you can sweep this and choose whatever you want, whatever frequency you want. Now you see this low frequency insignia here. It looks a little like a pitchfork. What it really is it's called a shelf. So this is fully parametric, and it's fully parametric when you can sweep whatever frequency in your band, add or subtract. Now on the low frequency and the high frequency, many times they give you shelving, which means that instead of peaking, these are called peaking, they will allow you to add and then stay at that level all the way out to the end of the spectrum, or reduce and stay down. And the same thing with low frequencies. That's why they call it shelving, because it looks like a shelf. It never comes back down. Call it peaking because it peaks and then it comes back. So that's called shelving. That's usually a choice in your EQs, whether I'm going to use peaking or shelving. And the shelving occurs at the high end and the low end. I use shelving all the time in the high end. It just really works for me. Shelving is that you can add at a specific frequency, and then how much you add stays at that level all the way out to the end of the spectrum, whether it's the high or the low end of the spectrum. There's a lot of places actually in the signal path to put an EQ. Let's back up a second because we're into specific types of EQ. Let's say we had a microphone. We've got you singing. How about that? Okay, so you're singing away. We get sound coming in here. Goes to a mic pre. That's short for a mic preamp. Then it goes into, say, an EQ. And then from there into Pro Tools to be recorded. That's one positioning to use it. Or we could put a compressor first, or another kind of process, and then EQ, or daisy chain them, or use them in parallel, however we decide to use them, but they're building blocks to be able to manipulate the sound and the spectrum of a sound. Sometimes I'll take a kick drum, and I'll pass it through an EQ, and I'll take the non-EQ'd signal and mix it together with the EQ'd signal so I get the right balance I want. And, you know, to create an effect, you could very easily take this EQ and we could use this kind of a filter and then move this sweep frequency back and forth, and we go kind of sound. I'm sure you've heard songs where all of a sudden it goes and sort of collapses. Sweeps. That's EQ sweeping. And you can program this in automating the movement. So you can move it with the tempo of the song, all that kind of stuff to create an effect. Or you can use it to just enhance your vocal. We'll add a little bit of high frequency to make it a little more sparkly sounding. We'll add a little more low frequency. We'll take out a little low frequency so it's less boomy. So you can EQ to improve the sound or create effects. Or I have nightmares of people send me stuff that just sounds horrible, then I have to EQ it to make it sound halfway human. Oh, why did they do that? Why did they use that rotten mic? And how could they think that sounds good? And then I have to try to fix it. Okay, so that's what a parametric EQ is, and it's totally sweepable. A lot of these architectures, especially when you're talking about algorithms, can be interwoven, interchanged, and utilized together. And they've come up with stuff like a dynamic EQ. So if the signal gets loud, it changes what EQ happens. I mean, all sorts of stuff that you can do that wasn't really the basic toolkit that we started with in the analog world. You can't get too aggressive, because if you solo something, you have the tendency to get very aggressive with your EQ and forget about the other elements it has to combine with. We all know that the hi-hat is never going to be heard alone, but when you solo it, you can make it sound really amazing, but then it may not fit in with the rest of the rhythm. So, and that's another problem people have with tambourines and high frequency stuff like shakers. They brighten it so it sounds really realistic, and then they can't make it sit in the mix properly because all those high frequencies just pop right out too much. So that's why I always try to make things sound as real. I start that way. Look, we're talking about an art form, so I'm just giving you what I think and how I do it. And my tendency and my style is to make things sound really good and real. Something that sounds amazing, but it sounds real. It's not like I'm starting with a computer program and saying, how can I make this sound really strange? Even though I can, and I have at times. But I use that more as an effect than a basic premise. You can do whatever you like, of course, with your own music. And some people say, wow, how can I make this just sound not normal, but cool? There's a band called, back in the 80s, it was called The Art of Noise. That's exactly what they did. They took sounds and they twisted them out of shape, and they did all sorts of effects that were just really odd sounding in terms of what reality would be like. And they made it sound really amazing, and it was really cool. It was fun to listen to because these sounds were coming out of nowhere, going, wow, that's really cool. And that's really great for a moment, but if you take a sound like a piano and make it sound like an amazing piano, it's going to be timeless because it's a real instrument, or a violin or a cello. It's a real instrument that has real acoustics to it. I'm not advocating for either one. I'm just saying you can do both. And that's part of your toolkit, really. This is, the art form of how to do it well. We're just basically talking about the tools at the moment, not how you choose to use them. With engineering and with producing and with computers, you can get kind of crazy with, wow, I've got total control, let's utilize it. Many times, restraint of control over your sounds is sometimes better. Staying out of the way of a great performance and a great instrument sounding great. Try to stay transparent and let it be great.